mean, how do you understand Buddha nature? I think we have quite a number of people in the audience who wouldn't necessarily have a sort of advanced, well-informed understanding of Buddha nature. So if you can share that.
Sure. So, I mean, I went through a long period of complete ignorance. So it wasn't like I was, I had someone who gave me tutelage from day one in these particular areas, but rather I just said, that's what I'm going to do. And my teacher at that point was Geshe Lundrup Sopa, who was a very accomplished scholar in the Geluk tradition, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. And he was very supportive and kind to me, but he knew nothing whatsoever about these topics of Nyingma traditions and the Great Perfection and so forth. So it was really, 3 years at Wisconsin, just struggling through reading translations and other kinds of things. And of course, I was doing a lot of other stuff that had nothing to do with Buddha nature or the Great Perfection. And then I ended up being in Asia more or less for the next 4 years. And that's where I really began to get the opportunity to work with Nyingmapa teachers of various kinds and go through these. But I can still remember in that first year, I think I was going back and forth between Varanasi and Kathmandu. And I was having trouble. I got lots of teachers who I was getting various teachings from, but I couldn't get anybody to read with me what I was trying to read, which was Longchenpa's Sikdun Se, which is this masterly survey, the treasury of words and meaning of the Dzogchen Nyingtik tradition, and particularly how Buddha nature plays out in it. And I can still remember back then sitting in my little place by myself trying to read this Tibetan text, which I could make no sense of whatsoever. And it was just, like fantastic visions. And not like visions like a meditation, but more just like visions of what this might mean and so forth. So I still have that acute memory back then of trying to struggle through with what is this stuff, without some kind, quiet voice giving me a deliberate exposure to it. And in some ways, I think that was really great because it gave me the chance to be generative. It gave me the chance to really encounter just how uncertain or unknown some of these meanings are, and rather than just having someone give me a really clear, patient exegesis and having to sort through that myself, and only gradually over time being able to get access to the competency in Tibetan and the types of teachers and so forth that could help me really understand these. And I still remember the larger issues that I was thinking about with regards to Buddha nature, which I still think of today. And I'll just maybe list those out. So one would be, and these are all pretty obvious questions that have been there about Buddha nature from the start, and that I think Tibetans were struggling with in the 11th and 12th and 13th and 14th century when they wrote the text that I'm most concerned with. One would be, how do we interpret this idea of Buddha nature? Do we interpret it literally? Do we interpret it metaphorically as something about essential goodness or capacity for spiritual awakening? And if we don't just go to those metaphoric, abstract explanations, what does it actually mean? Does a Buddha nature have agency? And if it does have agency, what kind of agency does it have? And how does that agency, if it's located within us, how does it relate to our own agency as individuals? And then I also wondered about, how does Buddha nature relate to other forms of what we call the Buddha? How does it relate to the historical Buddha? How does it relate to the capacity of other individuals to become awakened Buddhas? How does it relate to the Buddhas that govern over Pure Lands? And that particularly led me to think a lot about, here's this minute internal dimension we call a Buddha nature. And then there's these visions we have in Mahayana sutras in particular of these vast cosmological Buddhas that are just huge and massive. And they're home to billions of worlds that are in the pores of their skin and arrayed above their joined hands in a stack of galaxies and so forth. So you have this like most internal, intimate form of a Buddha, and then you have this external, vast, cavernous forms of Buddhas. How do they relate to each other? And then finally, what's the implication for practice? This is, of course, in a lot of early Indian Buddha nature scriptures. You read them and you wonder, okay, so what exactly do you do again? Or what's the implications of this for contemplative practice or ritual practice? And on the other side, what's the implication of this for philosophical concerns about the nature of knowledge and the nature of the mind and how we understand the body and agency and ethics, et cetera? What's the theoretical implications of Buddha nature? And finally, I think one of the things that I kept coming back to is, why are so many core Buddha nature scriptures characterized by aesthetics, by strongly aesthetic uses of literature, allegories, metaphors, striking images, narratives, as opposed to, like a focus on logical analysis and so forth. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. Why is that the case? Why is there that convergence? How do we think through such text? What does it mean to do philosophy through such context? So those are just big background questions that I had when I first encountered Indian Buddha nature text, and I brought with me as I began to study Dzogchen materials and see how they began to respond and create entire complex systems that went in very different directions.